On the cold evening of June the 18th, 1815, there was a lonely man who stood atop the Cathedral of Winchester in England, gazing out to sea, waiting anxiously for a signal that was to come from a ship out at sea. At last he saw it, and waited with bated breath, as this message would communicate the result of the decisive battle between the Duke of Wellington and the French dictator, Napoleon Bonaparte, who had terrorized the rest of Europe and who was now a great threat to the nation of England. And so the whole nation waited with bated breath as this signal came in. The signal, fortunately, came in just as a heavy fog was about to descend on the whole of the English Channel. But luckily, this man got the signal. Unfortunately, he wished he hadn't, for the signal stated, "Wellington defeated." The whole of England was plunged into a deep sadness and gloom, as they now expected a bad fate awaiting them, as Napoleon would now conquer their nation. But a few hours later, their sadness was turned to jubilation, as the fog lifted and the full signal now came through. Wellington defeated the enemy. This is a wonderful story that should help us understand how the apostles and the disciples of Jesus felt in between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. Because during that time, they only had half the message. And so often we are like them in our lives. We've only got half the message, and we walk around with expressions of doom and gloom because we have only had a narrow vision that hasn't had the broadness of perspective to understand the whole situation and how God is working in the misfortunes that befall us. There is a Shona proverb that states, "Nyamunatsi ndiye nyakuchirwa nemba," literally translated means the person of a generous, large and forgiving heart normally has his house burnt down. Meaning that those who are generous, accommodating, forgiving, normally end up being taken advantage of and being walked all over by people like a doormat. There is in Franco Zeffirelli's production, the mini-series Jesus of Nazareth, an intriguing portrayal of Judas Iscariot that contends and portrays Judas as a member of an elite Jewish group known as the Zealots. Now, the Zealots were a group who bonded together with the sole purpose of throwing off the yoke of Roman rule through violence. And so, in Zeffirelli's mini-series, we have a scene where Judas leads his confreres, his Zealot compatriots, to Jesus and introduces them. And these Zealots are prepared to put themselves and their weapons and their fighting spirit at the service of Jesus if he will lead them in battle against the Romans. They cannot believe their ears, though, when Jesus goes on to extol to them the virtues of loving their enemies and praying for those who persecute them. They leave his presence absolutely disgusted. And if they knew this proverb in Shona, that the generous one has his house burned down, they probably would have quoted it to Jesus and said it to themselves, and it's quite likely they found an Aramaic equivalent. But we know that they were not right, because when they saw Jesus crucified, they probably said to themselves, "Wow, we told them so," and probably went to their graves thinking that they were right. But we know that they weren't right, because Jesus' resurrection proves to us that Jesus' message of love of enemies, forgiveness, and love overcoming hate is the only way to live, is the only way to come by the joy and peace that God promises us. But notice that Jesus doesn't go to the zealots or to his enemies, the chief priests. He doesn't appear to them and say, "Ha, I told you so. Look, I'm right, and you were wrong." No. Jesus only appears to those who have faith in him. Some of us think of the resurrection as Jesus' greatest miracle, as Jesus' last-ditch attempt to convince all of his detractors and those sitting on the fence that he was truly right and he was the Son of God. But the resurrection is not a spectacle. It's not a grand miracle. We need to think of the resurrection as a ministry of Jesus. And this is why Jesus only goes to those who were really close to him and appears to them in their doom and in their depression. And he ministers to them a ministry of hope. And he changes their desolation into jubilation. He wants to tell them that they were not wrong to trust in him. He had ushered them into a new world, a world of love and forgiveness. And he wants to show them that this world and this way of living, this way of trusting the Father, is the only way to go, to come by joy. And so we as Christians are called to be ministers of hope. To those who have believed that being generous was a good idea and perhaps have got burnt for it. And we've got to go back to them and say, carry on hoping that that is the right way to go. And to us ourselves, if we have been generous and have got our fingers burned, to carry on and let the fire of the resurrection burn within us. Because it's only with that spark of hope that we can truly become believers of the resurrection and apprehend Jesus' resurrected life acting in the midst of our world and our communities. God bless and have a happy Easter.